Okay, so today we have an introduction to Nietzsche. Finally, we're gonna now be switching gears, right? So far, most of the philosophers, actually all the philosophers we studied, have come from some kind of religious background, right? Because the world was predominantly religious, right? The ancient world was a religious world, so was, of course, the medieval times. So now we're moving into modernity, which I'll introduce today. And now we're moving into a much more secular mindset, right? So those of you in the class who were, getting tired of of reading philosophers that assume that God exists, right? Right, most of the philosophers we studied, they don't even question, right, whether God exists. They assume they exist, and then they move, they ask their questions. So now we're really entering a more secular mindset where really the question of the existence of God will come into play, right? From now on, from Nietzsche on, you'll be dealing with philosophers who are struggling, right? With, does God really exist? Is there a God? And if there is a God, who is he, right? So Nietzsche is really one of the earlier ones to really shed doubt on the existence of God, and in a way giving a really open criticism, very pointed criticism of the dominant religion of Europe, right, at the time, which was Christianity. So we have now very different mindsets. So whoever in the class is more secular minded, this second half of the class is going to feel more comfortable, right? Very good. So here's the outline of what I'm going to talk about. So number one, I'll talk about modernity, and then I'll mention what is called the Copernican shift. Then we'll talk about Nietzsche's biography. And then we'll talk about his philosophy, right? Nietzsche's, I don't know why. And there we'll talk about two things. We'll talk about his criticism of Christianity. And then we'll look at what he considers to be his responsibility as a philosopher, the creation of new values. Okay, so once he's dismantled Christianity, right, which is what he attempts to do through a lot of his work, what's left, right? If we don't have the basis of Christian values that we've had in Europe, right? This was really the basis of the law, was really based on Christian values, right? What's next? What kind of values do we now still have, right? So that's what he's going to be talking about. Once we've dismantled the old, right, outdated religious mindset that we've been living with as Europeans, he says, right, or as the West, right? We're part of this, of course. He's saying, now we need to create new values, and we're going to see how he proposes to do that. And then last little thing we'll talk about is his writing style. So number 4, writing style. Okay. All right, so starting with the modernity, right? We're now moving away from the Middle Ages. We spent a long time in the Middle Ages. And now we're entering modernity, which is right after the Middle Ages. This is around the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries in Europe, right? Nietzsche is from Germany, and he's going to be philosophizing in the 19th century, right? He was, I think he was born in 1844, right? I'll talk about that in a second. So, but let's talk in general, right? Modernity. So this age has been referred to as the coming of age of humanity. Let me write it down, right? This is humanity reaching its adult age, right? Notice that humanity is only here Europeans, right? Humanity as a whole is doing a lot of other things, right? If you go to other continents, other things are happening. But in Europe, right, we're calling this the coming of age of the European humanity, right? So this is really the moment where the West, I'll say not humanity, but the West, right, is really becoming adult. In other words, it's separating itself from the old authorities, and specifically the old authorities of the church, right? And remember, Europe, even though you have, Islam and Judaism, people are there, right, who are Muslim and Jewish, the predominant religion is Christianity. Whether it's Catholicism or Protestantism, is still Christianity, right? So Europeans in the modern times, right, are slowly moving away from the authority of the church, right? This is one of the main shifts that occurs between medieval times and modernity. right? You have a shift away from religion, a shift away from the authority of the church. And so we have to ask ourselves, why is the West doing that at that moment, right? When I say the West, by the way, I include, right, Europe, and eventually, of course, the United States, which comes out, right, of Europe. So why is the West slowly moving away from religion? Any ideas? Let's see if you have any historical consciousness, European historical consciousness. Alim, go ahead.
Maybe the scientific revolution. I know around this time, or a little earlier, people started becoming more aware of science.
Very good, right? First main reason, right, why we feel the need to don't need religion anymore is the rise of science, right? So make sure you write this down. The first point, right? First reason why there is beginning to be a separation between the Western mindset and the religious mindset is the rise of science. We realize with science, we can solve our own problems. We don't need God to fix everything anymore, right? By the way, Maimonides was already thinking like that. Remember, right? For Maimonides, God is not there to fix our problems. We have to fix our problems, of course, through divine inspiration. But same, he's moving towards that direction, right? That we can fix our own problems with proper use of our mind. We can solve world hunger. We can solve droughts. We can solve, environmental issues. We can solve, the plagues. We can just develop medicine. We can develop technology. We can develop, knowledge, predictive ability, right, of the weather. And we don't have to do big prayers and processions, right, to invoke God's help, right? And so people are realizing, well, God is really, and there's a term, is a superfluous hypothesis. Let me write this down. Learn this complicated expression, right? He's a hypothesis that we don't need, superfluous. We don't need. We don't need to, we can survive without him. That's the idea, right? And so that's one of the first reasons, right? Why people are like, we don't need this old stuff anymore. We can move forward on our own. What is the second reason, do you think, that especially on European soil, people started to get suspicious, distrustful of the church? If you know a little bit church history on European soil, you would be able to answer. Anybody want to try that? Yes, Alim again.
Was it the Protestant Revolution with Martin Luther's, the complaints on the, yeah?
Okay, absolutely, right. So for centuries, the church had been kind of a force of oppression rather than being a force of liberation, right? On so many levels, right? So on the one hand, you have all of the wars, right, that the church is starting. That you have the Crusades, you have all of the religious wars between, for example, which are really religious, right? Between, I think, France and England, France and Germany at the time, right? Prussia. And so people are tired of the wars. And then you have the persecutions, right? For centuries, the church is persecuting whoever doesn't fit within its concept of what it means to be human. And then you have, of course, the church's wanting people to stay ignorant, right? To not know too much so that it can better control them. So, and then of course the oppression, financial oppression, right? The way you can buy your salvation, right? So in other words, if you pay enough money into the church, they will absolve you and you can go to heaven no matter what crimes you have committed. So people would, they would pay and pay and pay even if they didn't have the money, right? So people are tired, right? They get to modernity and they're like, we're sick and tired of this, this destructive force on the continent. And, the church has committed too many crimes. There's too much bloodshed associated with the church. We don't want anything to do with it anymore, right? One of the main speakers, right, in that sense against the church was Voltaire, who wrote a beautiful treatise called the Treatise of Toleration. So if you're interested in this kind of view, you could look it up. In this work, he says basically, if we didn't have religion, we would have world peace. It's one of his best arguments, right? He shows how throughout history, most wars, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Europe, were always triggered by some religious thing, right? So he actually makes the argument in the book, or he proposes that if, let's imagine a world with no religion, and probably this world will look very, very, very peaceful, he says, right? That's what he argues. So you have a lot of criticism going on, not just Nietzsche, right? Voltaire is earlier than Nietzsche. He's the 18th century, right, in France. So this is already going on, right? So these are the two main reasons, right? Number one, we don't need God. Number two, we're sick and tired of the oppression of the church, right? So that's why, right? Even if you go today, by the way, especially in France, right, which was the most critical of the church, which suffered the most under the church, right? People are completely allergic. I don't know if any of you have ever traveled to France. You talk to people about religion. Most people are not religious at all, and they will look at you like you have the plague. Right? It's like, what are you talking about? Don't harm my ears with whatever you're saying right now, right? There's really an allergy to religion that dates back from the oppression, right, of the church. Of course, here in this country, it's a different story, right? Whatever religion we have here, were persecuted, right? People who came from Europe to be able to survive here. So it's a different mindset, right? It's the mindset of the persecuted here, whereas there is the mindset of the persecutor, right? So you have, it's a different, which is why possibly in the States, we're much more tolerant, right, towards religion, because there was not this type of oppression that was experienced in Europe. Not yet, it's coming. we're on our way, but not yet. Okay, so this kind of shift, right, from religious to secular, from God-centered universe to human-centered universe, people have called the Copernican shift, right? Remind me, who is Copernicus, so we can understand what I mean by this. What was the big discovery of Copernicus? Anybody remember? Nobody knows Copernicus?
Yeah, that the sun was like that the world revolves around the sun, not the earth.
Very good, right? And Copernicus realized that, right, we thought that, okay, let me get this right. We thought that the sun revolved around the earth. And then Copernicus showed, right, that actually is the opposite. It's actually the earth revolving around the sun. So it's the same thing, right? In the Middle Ages, we thought that we revolved around God, right? But now it's God who is revolving around us, right? We are at the center. Copernican shift. Boom, you shift the center, right? We were at the periphery. We were on the outside and God was at the center. Now we are at the center and God is somewhere thrown away in the galaxy, right? A very small moon somewhere floating. Okay, so that's where we are, right? This is the context. This is the context where you have criticism of religion, trust in science, right? And especially a heightened individualism, right? In other words, human beings now don't want any more authorities over them. They want to make their own decisions, right? So this is really, I told you all this because this is really how Nietzsche thinks, right? This Nietzsche is really the product of his times. He's really going to be thinking along those lines. Very secular, very critical, very individualistic. And you will recognize the spirit of the times, right, in the way that Nietzsche philosophizes. Okay, so let's go a little bit into his biography so you have an idea who he is. So his dates are 1844 to 1900. So as you can see, he didn't live too long, right? He was actually quite sick most of his life. So early life, right? We have a few indications. He was in high school. He was actually very good at music in high school. He was a musician. He was a pianist. He even composed a few piano works, right? They're not very good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing he went into philosophy. They're very romantic, very complex, right? But they sound a little bit, I don't know if you know this expression in New York, all of you, schmaltzy. Let's see. Let me write it down. Anybody know what this is? Schmaltzig? This is Yiddish. Let's see how many New Yorkers recognize this. How many know what I mean by schmaltzig? Okay, nobody. Schmaltzig is like kind of sweet, sugary, too romantic, too sentimental. Sentimental, that's what it means, right? A little too sentimental, right? And so if you listen to it, right, he's not the best composer, but he was pretty good pianist, right? He was not bad. When he got to the university, he decided to study two things. He went into theology, and then he went into classical languages. So what is that? Classical languages is Greek and Latin. right? That's what we mean by classical languages, so that he could read the classics, right, in Greek and Latin. So he double majored in theology, Christian theology, and then Greek and Latin, right? So, so this is the first semester. He just arrived. He chose this double major. And then shortly into the semester, he comes across this book called The Life of Jesus, written by, and you can check it out if you're interested. Let me make sure I have the right, David Strauss. And this book actually was so controversial. This was a book that was pretty much banned, right? This was one of those books that was censored, or wanted, people wanted to censor it, because it was such a powerful dismantling of Christianity, right? The main thesis of the book was that the Gospels were written, that the person of Jesus existed, fine, and he was a teacher, but that all of the miracles, right, all of the supernatural things that he does, like walking on water or multiplying bread, and all the things that are, supernatural and fantastic, are inventions of the writers in order to attract more people. So the Gospels, they say, is just a way to make the teachings of Jesus, or the person of Jesus, more spectacular, right? More sexy, right? So now more people are attracted by all of his, wonderful miracles, and they're like, yeah, this is a powerful man, and they get, right, sucked in. So, and of course, I mean, obviously, there's no way to contradict that theory, right? Because nobody has ever done these miracles. So are they inventions? Because we have never seen them, right? So it does make sense to imagine, right, that they probably invented these, since nobody has done these, right? Nobody has walked on water except in the movie. Did you guys see the movie Messiah? Anybody put your hand in the screen on Netflix? Messiah. What do you guys watch? I strongly say it's a great, oh my God, I'm putting it in the chat. What, not The Office, Messiah. Messiah is a movie which is interesting because it's a replaying of what Jesus would look like today. And the guy playing Jesus, I believe, is an Arab, right? Who had a Jewish mother, I think. And he's so controversial in the show, right? In the same way that Jesus was controversial when he was, of course, right, walking the earth around 3. When was he there? The beginning of AD, right? So, so I would really suggest, if you want to get like kind of a modern day experience of how people reacted, right, to the person of Jesus, this movie is actually doing a good job. It's a series. It's a Netflix series. Oh, and I'm seeing from Subhan Kulova, The Physician isn't on Netflix anymore. What do you mean? How can they take it down like that? Can they do that? Can you find it on Amazon, maybe? Pay $3? Yeah, look it up on Amazon, hopefully. Okay, back to Nietzsche. Okay, so he read this book, right, which kind of makes a really convincing argument that, Jesus was blown up out of proportion, basically, right? And it convinces him. He's convinced, right? And in a way, and at that moment, he completely rejects Christianity, right? He was probably like most Germans, born and raised in Christianity. And he probably had it coming, right? He was probably simmering for a long time, like some of you, right? And that was the straw that broke the camel's back, that book, right? So he completely repudiates Christianity and will continue to do so throughout his work, right? He will be quite faithful to that repudiation. So, and we'll talk about that, right? We'll talk a little bit about his criticism a little later, and also why we should take it seriously, right? Especially, by the way, if we come from a Christian background. It's very important. I'm going to talk about why it's important to take Nietzsche seriously, especially as a believer, right? And I'll say why in a bit. Okay, continuing with his life. So he, in 1869, he finishes more or less, I think his master's, and he ends up teaching in Switzerland at the University of Basel. And then he's, of course, working on his doctorate. But then in 1870, you have the war between France and Prussia, which is the old name for Germany, right? That was how Germany was called at the time, the Prussian Empire. And so you have a war between France and Prussia. And he's German, right? So he's enlisted. He has to join the army, and he hates it, right? He's absolutely not cut out to fight, right? And the thing he hates the most, he writes, right, later on his experience, is what he calls this kind of herd mentality that you have in the army, right? Or in any type of nationalism. So let me explain that a little bit. I lost my pen. I can't teach without my pen. Ah, here it is. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that, right? Herd mentality is basically the mentality that an individual takes when they're in a herd and they start to feel the pressure of the herd, right? A herd is a group of animals, right? That's what is a herd, right? It's like a huge group of animals together, right? And we notice in the animal world, when you have a herd of animals, when you have many animals together, what they tend to do is follow one, and all of them follow, right? You have this with sheep, by the way. If any of you ever end up taking care of sheep, the technique, my father took care of sheep for a while in his youth, and he told me the trick, right? Sheep are all over the place. They go everywhere, right? They have absolutely no sense of direction. There's always, like, if you have 10 sheep, they're all going in different directions. So what you have to do with sheep is pick the biggest one and make him the leader. And then you guide the biggest sheep and everyone follows, right? That's the herd mentality, right? Herd mentality is this thing you see in the animal kingdom where you have a big one and everyone follows the big one, right? And Nietzsche is noticing that we have this also among ourselves, human beings. When you have a big leader who has a big mouth, everybody tends to kind of fall behind him, right? We tend to join groups and want to be part of a group, and we tend to merge with the group. And Nietzsche was so allergic to this, right? So anytime he saw this, right, in his country, and later on, of course, it would get worse, right, with the rise of Hitler, he just had such an allergy to this kind of group mentality, right, where the individual kind of loses all of their own opinions so that they can be part of the group, right? The peer pressure, right, phenomenon. So anyways, the army is kind of like that, right? You have the general that you have to follow blindly without thinking, and he hated that. He hated the kind of, authority that you have to blindly follow in the army and so forth, right? So he left the army finally after the war, and he was just completely destroyed, right? Not only he had the PTSD probably, but he also caught a bunch of diseases on the battlefield. And then he was just completely disillusioned, right, with his own country. So he, after this, he gets sicker and sicker, right? All of the diseases, he catches several on the battlefront, start to eat away, right, at his body. And so he gets too sick to teach, right? He stops teaching, and he just starts writing, and he writes like a madman for a couple years, and then he dies, right? So he basically wrote most of his works in the last 6 or 7 years of his life, right? When he wasn't teaching anymore and he was just very sick, and he was, his body was degenerating. He was just writing and writing and pouring out everything he had to say at record speed. He wrote, for example, one of his most important works, the Twilight of the, no, not the Twilight, Thus Spake Zarathustra. Let me write this down. It's a good read, which we're not reading, but you should read it. Zarathustra. This is one of his most famous works, right? He wrote it in 10 days, right? He just, right? He was one of those, right? Very fiery writers, just comes out like a volcano. So anyways, that was kind of his life, the last few years, his struggle with his health, and just his pouring out of his soul in his writings, right? Up until the very last day of his life, he's still writing and scribbling something, right? So that gives you a little idea of the man, right? And you can see already on the picture, I think if some of you have his pictures, very passionate, very stubborn, very strong-handed, and extremely witty, right? There's something in Nietzsche that is incredibly witty, right? Funny. He's very pleasant to read if you want to have a good laugh, if you're ready to laugh, right? If you're not ready to laugh, he's very painful. So anyways, that gives you a little idea of his life and his background. Let's now zoom in on his philosophy. So you have an idea of where he's going, so you can decipher the text better. So there's one sentence that really describes the starting point of Nietzsche's philosophy, and this is this one. This is a very famous quote that you find in, I think, in the Gay Science, which says this: God is dead. Yes, thank you, Alim. Your favorite quote, Alim. God is dead. The sea, the open sea, I'm writing it down for you guys, lies before us. Okay, so this is a very famous quote, very, very poetic, right? He's basically proclaiming something which is already taking place, as we learned when we talked about modernity, right? God is dead, he says, right? And it's true. When you look at modernity, God has a very small place. He's become a small moon, right? Circling around humanity, right? Humanity has taken center stage. Remember, we're rejecting religion. We are now counting only on ourselves. People are much more secular minded. And so he's just not really, you know, being nasty, right? He's simply stating a fact. God is dead. But then instead of, you know, falling into despair, like many people, right, who regret the good old days when everyone believed in God and had a, you know, a precise moral code, right? He's saying, nah, this is great news, right? This is good news for him. God is dead. And then he says, look, the sea, the open sea, lies before us. All right, what does that mean? What do you think he means? So this is poetry, right? So what does he mean, do you think, by saying that the death of God opens up the sea before us? Anybody have any ideas? How can we interpret this kind of poetic description of the death of God? Suresh, go ahead, talk to us.
If there's no higher power, if there's nobody up above watching our every move and judging us 24/7, then we're free to do what we please.
Exactly, right? No more some, you know, deity breathing down your neck and writing down all your sins, right? The God of Job, remember, in the prologue, right? God, watching. No, then you're kind of like, whoo, finally some oxygen, right? I can finally, you know, make my own decisions around here. I don't have to be like, you know, thinking constantly about the divine eye upon my life. I can kind of like, kind of feel lighter, right? Very good. Let's see. Cohen, why don't you talk to us and tell us what you mean?
Well, it was very similar to what Suraj said. Like, since there's no God, you can just do whatever you want.
Exactly, right? We're pretty free now. We can make our own decisions. We don't have to be scared of hell anymore. We don't have to be scared of the priest. We don't have to be scared of, you know, the afterlife. We're free to choose our own life. It's not scripted anymore. This is the main idea, right? Once you get rid of religion, which is really scripting your life, right? Very strictly, actually, right? If you read the Bible, right? It's very pretty narrow. You can't eat this, you can't do that, you can't say this, you can't, right? Everything is very scripted. And Nietzsche is saying, no more scripts. We can pretty much choose our own life. We can pretty much choose our own path. We can even choose our own morality, our own idea of what is right and wrong. This is where he's really pushing, right? So absolutely, right? So you guys are getting kind of the spirit. So really Nietzsche is writing in this state of joy and exuberance, right? That's really, when you read Nietzsche, you cannot read him. You will never understand him if you don't connect to the joy, right? This is somebody who writes and you can sense the enthusiasm and the exuberance and the joy of finally being free, right? So that's kind of really where Nietzsche begins, and everything now is coming out of that premise, right? Okay, so 2 points, right? That's going to be connected to this. So first of all, we'll see, like I mentioned earlier in my little outline, he's going to criticize Christianity. So let's talk a little bit about that, right? Point A, right? Critique of Christianity. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. What does Nietzsche have against Christianity, right? 2 things. I'm going to write them down and then I'll explain, right? First of all, he believes Christianity is nihilistic. I'll explain. And the second thing, he believes it is delusional. Delusional. Okay, these are the 2, and I just feel like I spelled one wrong. No, it looks okay. Anybody want to correct me? 2 words look okay? Nihilistic, delusional? Okay. Very good. All right, so let's go first into the nihilistic. Anybody know what nihilistic means? It's from the Latin nihil. I wonder how the Spanish is. Alim, go ahead. Enlighten us.
It means like everything is meaningless and there's no point to like life.
Okay, very good, right? Nihil means nothing, nothingness, that in Latin, right? Nothingness. So nihilistic basically is making something into nothing, basically killing it, right? When you're nihilistic, in a way, you are we say people are nihilistic when they have a kind of hatred of life. Life is nothing for them, right? Nihilistic. They are in a way judging life to be nothing worthwhile, right? Nihilistic. So he's saying actually Christianity, he accuses, right? And he'll show why. We'll talk about it when we do the first text, but he's basically saying Christianity is nihilistic. That is to say, Christianity hates life. That's what it means, right? When he says nihilistic. So let me write it down. Nihilism in Nietzsche is a hatred of life, right? Life is nothing. Okay, so we have to ask ourselves, what does he mean? Why is that the case? And we're going to see, right, when we do the first text, that it has to do with Christianity's constant distrust of what we call the passions, right? So you're going to see this in the first text, the passions, human passions, right? By which we mean simply human desires, right? As human beings, really, if you want to analyze, right, what makes us profoundly human and not just an object sitting around, is that we desire. We always want more. And what do we want when we desire in general? What is it? Think of all the desires you've had today, right? What is it you're looking at when you're desiring? Are you looking at yourself? Are you looking at God? What are you looking at? Gratification, where are you going to find it, Wilkes? Gratification and joy. What is the object of our desires most of the time? Your pillow, Suresh. Oh, Suresh, am I putting you to sleep? What are we desiring? When you desire, for example, a human being, right? We desire human beings. When you desire some food, or your pillow, Suresh, right? Where are you looking? Are you looking at yourself? Are you looking at your Bible? Are you looking at God? What are you looking at? Thank you, Leung, and thank you, Wilkes, right? The external world. Desires are what pull you into the world. Write this down, because this is fundamental to understand why Christianity hates desires, right? Desires pull us into the world, right? Desires, when we have a desire, it's always a desire of the world. We desire a human being. We desire a house, we desire some money, we desire this job, we desire this food, we desire this bed, right? Desires is the world calling out to us, right? Now, we've done some Plato, right? And Christianity is very close to Platonism in that sense. What is Christianity's view of the world? In the text of Christianity, in a way that's very close to Plato's philosophy, what is the Christian view of the world? For those of you, where are my good Catholics? You will know the answer right away. Is the world a good place to be as a Christian? No, very good, Wilkes. Explain to us why. Why is the world not a good place for the Christian to be?
Pretty much something that like you're taught to fear, and in order to be safe, you need to follow rules and follow God's rules.
Absolutely, right? The world, you're taught to fear the world, and one wonders why. What is so fearful about the world, right? Do you know? Wilkes, can you answer that question? Why is the world so fearful?
There's just bad things that happen.
Okay, it's just, I mean, because Christianity tells us that bad things will happen to us, right? We have to carry the cross and so forth. So it's not just bad things, right? Because bad things should happen to the Christian who is being self-sacrificial and following Jesus, right? So what is so bad about the world? If you're thinking of Plato, you will know the answer, because Christianity got that perspective from Plato. We'll talk about this. What's Plato's view on the world, the material world? Did we talk about Plato? A little bit with Rumi, right? When we did the cave. Do you remember what was Plato's view on the world? Did Plato like the world? Yes, we're connecting it to desires in a second. It's connected. What I'm looking at is, why is the world such a despicable place? Let's look at Plato and you'll understand Christianity. What does Plato say about the, I think I mentioned this, right? We have Milgram, go ahead.
I'm not totally sure. This is kind of a guess based on the cave story, that like we have like a false perception of truth. So like, I guess you could say that like the world doesn't provide us with truth, or like we don't have the capabilities to like find truth in the world.
Very good, right? You're very much on the right track. The world is material, right? And the material realm in Platonism is considered to be corrupt. What really matters is the ideal world, right? Remember, Plato is saying always we have to leave behind the cave, which is the material world, in order to access this higher realm, which is the world of ideals, right? So anytime you're engaging with the material world, you're in the cave, you're low, right? You have to leave the cave and start thinking about justice, freedom, how the world should be, right? And so Christianity in many ways, right, has followed in the footsteps of Plato more than in the footsteps of Jesus. And I'm not even kidding about that one. This is one of the main issues of Christianity, which we'll talk about when we do the first text, right? And in many ways has adopted the Platonic view of the world as inherently corrupt, diseased, sinful, degenerate, that we have to leave the world in order to be our higher selves, right? And so make sure you write this down, right? So the view of Christianity on the world aligns itself with Plato's philosophy. This is where Christianity is following Plato more than Jesus. We'll see that even in more detail when we do the text. And just like Plato, right, for Christianity, the world is supposed to be corrupt, right? I'm writing it down for you. It's corrupt, it's vile, it's material, it's dense, and it's sinful, right? This is the view, the Platonic, right, or the Greek view in general. This is the cave, right? And so, just like Plato says, we have to leave the cave to access, right, the realm of the ideals, how things should be. Christianity also does this movement, says we have to leave behind the material and connect to the spiritual higher self, right? So now looking at our desires, where are our desires leading us most of the time? In the cave or outside of the cave? Thank you, Leon. The desires are pulling you back in the cave. You desire this person, this object, this career, this money, and you're really desiring the world, which is supposed to be corrupt and vile and disgusting, right? And that's why Christianity says you shouldn't desire, right? It's not that you shouldn't desire ever, but you shouldn't desire the world. You should only desire God, right? So Nietzsche is looking at this, right? And he's like, are you people crazy? Right? Have you lost your mind? So he's going to really criticize this view that the world is inherently bad. He asks, why? What is so bad about the world that we cannot desire it? This is essentially Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. He's going to ask the question, why is the world so bad? And why is it therefore wrong? Why is it then not, if the world is not bad, why shouldn't we desire it, right? Why do they hate the world so much? Who taught them to do this? And is this a healthy attitude, right? This is really the main point of Nietzsche. Why should the world be seen as corrupt and vile and sinful? And Nietzsche is going to say, I don't think that's the case. Right? He's going to say, no, the world is beautiful. The world is wild. The world is powerful, right? Nature, everything that we have around us is amazing. It's beautiful. It's holy. And we ought to desire it. It's okay to desire it, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. Nihilistic because, according to Nietzsche, Christianity hates the world. That's a nihilistic position. And we'll talk about this particular stance next time on the first text, right? Now, the second criticism he's going to give of Christianity is the fact that it's delusional, right? This is going to be our second text. So this is, in essence, I'll just summarize, right? According to Nietzsche, and this is really now honing in on the problem of suffering, right? And let's all remember how much Nietzsche himself suffered, right? So he's somebody who has a firsthand experience, right, with suffering. And he realized, right, early in his life that Christianity, instead of facing suffering and addressing it, avoids it, right? In other words, the technique of Christianity in the face of suffering is to say, it's okay if you suffer now. What matters is the afterlife. So don't worry now, your life doesn't matter anyways. It's all nothing anyways, right? So if you suffer now, it's good because then you will have a crown in heaven. You will be highly exalted in the heavens, right? So Nietzsche is looking at this argument and he's like, you guys are just escaping, right? You're not facing the problem. You're not facing the issue. You're just kind of going around the problem. And he's very angry about that, right? He would like to have tools to navigate his own suffering rather than being told this story that in the end is going to be okay, which for him there's no argument that there is a heaven and a hell, right? So he's telling Christianity, basically, stop telling me your stories. Give me the tools to navigate my suffering right now instead of telling me these fancy stories about the afterlife, which probably doesn't even exist, right? That's his issue. Okay, so delusional, right? Create an alternative reality to help us so that this reality doesn't really matter, right? It's okay, don't worry, you're suffering, but you'll live 1,000 years in heaven, you know, in perfect bliss, right? So that's the second issue, right, that we're going to talk about. Okay, any questions so far before I continue? Anything you need to add with Nietzsche?
Was he an atheist? Or he believed in something else?
Yeah, so Nietzsche is very ambiguous, right? That's an interesting question. In his later texts, he actually starts writing about Jesus. And he actually admires Jesus. He doesn't admire Christianity, but he does admire the founder, right? And he also has another deity which he admires. This is the Greek god Dionysus, right? And in many ways, there are similarities in Nietzsche's mind, which actually you can find even in reality between Dionysus and Jesus, right? They're very similar in their personality. So if you study a little bit about the god Dionysus, you will see some similarities with the way that Jesus taught and lived his life, right? So he kind of merges the two towards the end of his life. So he is a spiritual person, right? I think, even if he's not a religious person, he definitely is a very spiritual person because he is intrigued by the person of Jesus. He's intrigued by the Greek god Dionysus, and he's kind of seeking his path along those lines, right? So does that answer your question, Leon, a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yep.
Okay, good. Anybody else has a quick question before I continue to his creation of values? Okay, so now we go to the second part of his philosophy, right? Once he has destroyed Christianity, he has dismantled it because it's nihilistic, it's delusional, according to him. He will say, well, where do we go from there, right? How do we build a new morality, right? Now that we've dismantled Christianity, who is going to tell us what is right and wrong? How are we going to find our path, right? And what he's proposing here, and we're going to see that when we get to the text, is what is actually the ancient Greek model of morality, which is actually what we call in many traditions the middle path, right? In other words, he's saying we should go back to the ancient Greek way of seeing right and wrong, and just leave behind the way Christians see things in this kind of dualistic right, wrong, and actually go back to a more ancient way of determining what is the right thing to do, which the Greeks used to call the middle way. In other words, it's not about choosing right over wrong. It's about walking a middle path between one extreme and the other. Okay, let me say it again, right? The ancient Greek way, actually, I'll write it, right? It's not about choosing right over wrong, right? Like in Christianity, it's about choosing a middle path between extremes. So let's give an example, right? Okay, in certain very, very conservative Christian denominations, it is forbidden to drink alcohol, okay? We're good with that. I think in other religions too, by the way, Islam too, forbidden to drink alcohol. Something is right, something is wrong. It's right to not drink alcohol and it's wrong to drink alcohol, right? We're clear. Now, what would be the middle way approach to alcohol? Anybody knows? Go ahead, Leon, tell us.
I mean, I think the middle ground of between not drinking and drinking is to just to have in moderation.
Exactly.
My guess.
Exactly. Okay. So drinking is neither considered right or wrong. We're not dealing with right and wrong anymore in the ancient Greek way. We're simply acknowledging that everything in life becomes wrong if it's done in excess, and it becomes right if it's done in moderation. So nothing in itself is right or wrong, right? There's no particular activity in itself that you can say, this is sinful. Every activity is okay as long as it's done in moderation. This is very freeing, right? The idea that any activity is okay if it's done in moderation. So anytime you have excess, that's where you have a problem. Okay, everybody, anyone want to respond to that? Does that make sense? Harkstart, go ahead.
Yeah, for the most part, that definitely does make sense, and like that sounds pretty reasonable. But then, like, obviously there are limitations to that. Like, murder is not good, even if you only kill one person. And like, there are plenty of things like that that the Greeks would agree with. So, like, where's the line?
I was waiting for that one. Okay, so let's analyze murder, right? Is murder a moderate action? Let's ask ourselves that. Alim, go ahead.
So, okay, so when the army murders, like, people, like, they kill people, no one, like, everyone's, oh, like, you're a hero, even though they're still killing human life. But in our country, if someone kills someone else, it's murder, you're a horrible person, you go to jail. So I feel like that's the moderation. Like, if you kill, it should be for, like, the army, not for your anger or something like that.
Okay, very good, right? Suppose you decide to murder someone, right? This, according to Nietzsche, is coming out of an excess. You have become excessively angry, and now you're going to kill this person. So murder in itself is already an excessive version of hate, right? Suppose you have a person you don't like. You love them, you hate them, you want to kill them, right? You love them, you want to kill them. The middle ground can never be murder, right? Murder is already excessive. A Harkstart. Do you see what I'm saying?
I mean, a little bit, but like, you know, there's capital punishment, which is a heavily debated idea, and it's not coming out of anger. I mean, you know.
And that would be probably okay in that context. In the Greek context, capital punishment, because it's coming from a sane, rational, it's not excessive, you're not with an axe, you know? Right? That would probably be considered okay, right? Williams, I'm sorry, I cut you off. I probably spoke in your place. Williams, please come back. What did you have to say?
I was just saying, like, there's a thin line, because to add, like, there's self-defense. So it depends on the situation. Can't say something is good or bad or moderate. It just depends on the situation.
Right, exactly, right. The idea in the Greek morality or ethics, right, is simply you have to, when you're doing something, your internal disposition has to be balanced. And so maybe then you're right, Harkstart, that if I'm making a rational decision, But even you're thinking, right, anytime you want to kill someone, usually it's out of some kind of excess. I mean, let's imagine even cold-blooded murder. So you have hot-blooded murder. Obviously, the Greeks would be like, ew, this is excessive, this is disgusting, it's not good. But even cold-blooded murder, sometimes coming from another urge. Suppose you kill someone because you want their wife, right? And you're thinking, you know, I'm going to plan this, and you're very rational, you're very calm when you shoot the guy, right? So is that still excessive? Well, in a way it's excessive because you desire something you don't own. You desire too much. You're greedy, right? And so in that sense, even though your murder is very balanced, your greed isn't. Does that work a little bit, Harkstark? Does that help a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so in that sense, right, in general, right, the Greeks are saying your own passions. It's not the way you commit the murder, right? You yourself, whatever you do, you have to do in a state of complete balance where nothing in you is taking over, right? There's not too much greed or too much violence. You're very balanced and calm. And I mean, I would argue, I mean, I kind of see what they're saying, right? If you're a balanced and calm person, most likely you're not going to commit any crimes, because crimes are always a sign of some kind of excess. Something took over, right? So I think that's where Nietzsche is going, right? He wants to stop demonizing certain actions. All actions are okay as long as they're done in a state of balance, right? In that sense. Okay. We'll see more of that, of course, later. So that's what he means with the creation of values, right? He's proposing to us to leave behind the Christian model of good and evil, which he feels demonizes the world too much, right? And he says, no, let's enjoy the world, but let's enjoy the world with moderation, right? So that's really two different ways of seeing morality. The first one demonizes the world so that everything in the world is evil, and the good is to move away from the world. And Nietzsche is saying, no, let's enjoy the world, let's celebrate the world, but let's do it in a way that's smart and balanced, right? In moderation. That's the idea. So that's kind of where he's going to be going with that. Okay. Now a few words on his writing style. Okay, there's someone in the chat. No, that's it. We have everything. Okay, a few words on his writing style to really help everyone find a way to resonate with Nietzsche. By the way, when I do the little poll that I do before every new author, I always have 50% who love Nietzsche and 50% who hate him. There is no middle ground with Nietzsche. So in this class, half of you will hate him and half of you will adore him. So I'm going to talk a little bit to the future Nietzsche haters to help you to be able to connect a little better with his philosophy. So two things are going to annoy some of you. The first one will have to do with Nietzsche's way of doing philosophy, right? And the second one will have to do with his views on Christianity. So let's talk about the first one first, right? So if you're kind of, if you liked Maimonides, if you have a very rational perspective, this is going to annoy you with Nietzsche, because Nietzsche does not give you a single argument for what he says. Nietzsche is just spouting anything that it seems, right? Anything that comes through his head, he says it. There's absolutely no moment where he stops down to argue for what he's saying, right? Nietzsche is throwing slogans, it seems, right? And this is going to annoy a lot of you, because you're going to be like, yeah, he's just saying all that stuff, but he's giving no support, no argument. He's just, you know, spouting whatever comes through his head. And what kind of philosopher would do that, right? Okay, so I'm going to address you right now, if you're going to be reacting like that, right? So first of all, this will help you really switch your perspective, right? First of all, we have to accept that Nietzsche is not going to make any arguments, because he is not interested in teaching us anything particular. Nietzsche is interested in making us uncomfortable. Okay, let me say that again, right? Nietzsche is not interested in teaching us how to live and how, like Maimonides, right? He's not wanting to teach us the way. He's not wanting to, you know, show us the way, like the Guide for the Perplexed. He doesn't want to open up new doors like Rumi, right? He doesn't want to give us a new perspective on God, like the Book of Job, right? Nietzsche is simply interested in making us uncomfortable, especially if we think we know. And so what he's really doing through all of his spouting and all of his, kind of offensive statements, because very offensive, right? He's really getting on our nerves, right? It's an emotional attack. When you read Nietzsche and you're either somebody who's a rationalist or someone who's some kind of religious background, he's really pushing your buttons, right? He's doing low blow after low blow. It's not fair, right? What he's doing is simply disturbing us. Why? So that we can begin to think more clearly why we believe what we believe, right? Anytime you're disturbed shows that you need to rethink the thing. You're disturbed because you are not yourself sure, right? And so it's an invitation actually to go deeper into what you actually believe, what we actually believe. So now, can you tell me anyone in ancient Greece who did the same thing? Went around asking annoying questions, disturbing everyone, and in the end was killed for it. Anybody know?
Socrates?
Very good. Socrates, right? Socrates never taught a single thing. All he did was make people uncomfortable so that they would begin to think more deeply and leave behind their assumptions and their kind of rigid ways of thinking, right? And start to go deeper. Nietzsche is doing that, right? Nietzsche is doing Socratic work. He's not trying to teach you a truth. He's not trying to give you any argument. He's just doing like Socrates, making you uncomfortable, pushing your buttons. Why? So that you sit down and give him a better answer than what you have right now in your mind, right? So I would really say to those of you who are annoyed at the lack of arguments, he's not trying to make an argument or convince you of anything. All he's doing is what Socrates did in the street of Athens, right? Is really to make you uncomfortable in your own beliefs, make you uncomfortable so that you can begin to think more deeply, right? Does that help a little bit? Well, we'll see later when you start reading. So now, second group of people that are going to be offended by Nietzsche is anyone who has some kind of religious background. Doesn't even have to be Christian. It can be Jewish, Muslim, because really when he's targeting Christianity, he's really hitting everybody else too, right? So here I want to make a very important point. I consider Nietzsche to be a rite of passage for any believer, any Christian or Jew or Muslim who wants to move from a childlike spirituality to an adult spirituality. Nietzsche is the rite of passage. In other words, if you can't allow yourself to be confronted by Nietzsche's questions and challenges, you're not ready to move into adulthood. You will stay with what Maimonides called, right, the blind faith of the believer who is worse than anything, right, for Maimonides. So Nietzsche really is an opportunity for anyone who has a religious background to really sit down and think and receive what he's saying, because I actually agree with a lot of Nietzsche's criticisms, right? In a lot of ways, he's making an accurate diagnostic of the problems of Christianity, right? So he is, if you see him as an invitation to deepen your faith, this will help, right? Nietzsche is really the rite of passage from childlike blind faith, right? Faith of what that you were taught and you never questioned, to now moving through the questions of Nietzsche and through his, annoying behavior and slogans, to thinking and trying to respond and taking his criticism seriously, because he's actually very sincere, right? He's very sincere. Behind the facade, Nietzsche must have been a Scorpio, right? Because he's very aggressive, but behind there's a very sincere heart, right? So the questions are actually very authentic, and they are questions that I believe every Christian especially, right, needs to be able to respond to if they want to have any type of credibility, right? So I would tell the Christians in the room, right, or even the Jews or the Muslims or the Hindus, right, who feel targeted by Nietzsche, take him as an opportunity to go deeper, right? He is really the one that will bring you to the adulthood version of your own faith, right? If you really take into account what he's saying and honestly and compassionately try to respond to him, you will see that he will enable you to go to depths, to a degree of, to go deep in a way that you wouldn't before, right? So that's the challenge, right? That's the thing that I would suggest. By the way, his criticism personally, right? When I first started to read Nietzsche, it took me about 10 years to respond to him. Some of these criticisms are really extremely difficult to respond to coming from a Christian perspective, right? I'm going to try to respond to them in the class, but it will take actually until the end of the semester until we fully responded to Nietzsche. He's that important, right? He's the turning point. Every single philosopher after him is going to have him in their mind as they're writing about religion. You cannot do any type of contemporary, right, philosophy of religion without Nietzsche in the back of your mind, right? You're going to sound like an idiot, right? So he's really the turning point, right? The pivot. So we have to understand him. If you really want to get to a more mature version of your faith, you have to sit down and actually listen and attempt to respond, right? Which is what I will try to do a little bit. And then also when we study the Marcel and Levinas, I will continue to respond to him. That's how important he is, right? Okay, last thing that will help you is to basically develop a sense of humor. So if you don't have a sense of humor, quickly get one. And let me explain, right? How many of you watch stand-up comedy, like Kevin Hart or Chappelle or some of these guys, right? That's it? Nobody? Okay, a little more. Good. Now, have you ever had this situation where the guy is making a super like sexist or racist or homophobic joke and you're laughing like an idiot and you're like, damn, why am I laughing? I'm not supposed to laugh, right? These comedians stop at nothing, right? They will make fun of everybody, of everything that we're not supposed to make fun of, right? And Kevin Hart, by the way, was under fire because of that, right? He would make fun of everything and he made fun of a little too much, right? According to some people. So comedians, in a way, stop at nothing. They will make fun. There's no limits to what they will make fun of. This is if you, and somebody who has a sense of humor kind of goes along with this. They understand everything is up for ridicule, right? It's allowed in the context of humor. We're allowed to make fun of anything. And then, we go back to our politically correct lives after that, right? So humor is a way to kind of like create a bit of oxygen in an atmosphere that has become too sanctimonious. I can't say this, I can't say that, I can't do this, I can't look that way. When you're in a context of comedy, there's no more shackles. You can just laugh at everybody, including yourself, right? So this is kind of how Nietzsche is. You have to see him like a stand-up comedian. He will stop at nothing and will make fun of the most sacred things in your life. But if you have a sense of humor, you can take the joke, right? Smile, and then try to think of a response. Am I making sense? Put your hand in the screen if I'm making sense, right? In other words, he's gonna touch on things that you think are sacred and you're gonna be really annoyed, right? But at that moment, just remember, you're in the stand-up comedy. Relax, laugh, it's funny, right? And then go home and reflect, he was kind of right about that. Now let me see how I can respond to him, right? Any joke, there's a little bit of truth, right? That needs to be taken into consideration. Let's see what Suresh has to say. Talk to us, Suresh. I love what you wrote and explain.
That's actually a quote from one of the characters from The Office. That's all.
You don't want to explain the quote? It would ruin it, right?
Yeah.
Comedy is a place where the mind goes to tickle itself. Very good, right? It's a place where we don't have to be sanctimonious anymore. And by the way, there's a religious way to be sanctimonious, and there's also a secular way to be sanctimonious, right? To be holier than thou. Ooh, how can you say that? How can you do that? right? The whole cancel culture, right, is a sanctimonious culture. Oh, you did that? How dare you? I don't want you in my life anymore. It's kind of like how it used to be in olden time religion. Like, you did this, you're not my daughter anymore. You're not my son anymore. We do this now again in cancel culture, the same attitude, very holier than thou, right? The expression, let me write this down. This is a way of saying I'm better than you, right? And therefore we can't talk. Right? And we have this even in the secular culture, right? And so stand-up comedy is an opportunity for us to kind of like, you know, take a breath, relax, stop being so uptight, and laugh at everything. Right? So that's what you kind of have to develop to really appreciate Nietzsche. You have to be able to laugh at his jokes. And then you can go home and think through the part of truth that he's saying and try to respond to him, right? If you can't laugh, you're only going to get frustrated and you won't be able to really receive what he's saying. And therefore, you won't be able to respond and to deepen, right? So that's why it's very important to enjoy Nietzsche, right? Try to enjoy him. That's basically the advice I'm giving you. Okay, any questions on how to read Nietzsche? Okay, good. All right. Any questions on anything else? Because now I'll talk a little bit about your tests. All right, very good. Good, so let me stop the recording.